outlook on the Philippines, one of the biggest Indonesian co-export destination in Southeast Asian region. So the presenter is Mr. Ghee Peh. Yeah? He's presenting for Mr. Sam Reynolds. Mr. Ghee Peh, our good friend, is from energy. He's the energy and finance analyst at the Institute for Energy and Economic Analysis, or IEEFA. So, Mr. Ghee Peh, yeah, the time is yours.
Great, thank you, Mahendra. Let me just share screen. Let me just share screen right now, and then we can try to finish this in 10 minutes. We are ready to go. Yep. Okay, great. So yeah, so this presentation is prepared by Sam, our new Philippine specialist. Unfortunately, he's stuck in the US because of the virus, but when things open up, he hopes to be in the Philippines as soon as possible. So without much ado, I'll just move on to the presentation. So we're talking about the Indonesian coal supply outlook to the Philippines. What is IEEFA? I think two of my colleagues have spoken about it. We are a non-profit. We work with publicly available information. So we are not going to give you the actual numbers and exact numbers. We take what's available in the public space, and then we combine with other policy announcements to analyze the road ahead, right? And the good news is the Philippines, because it's in ASEAN, just like Indonesia and Vietnam, is very interesting, and we'll find out in the presentation. So what's the summary for the Philippines? Well, things held up in 2020. The Philippines outperformed China as a market for Indonesia. There's a shipping sample done by Banchero Costa, and the Philippines shipments from Indonesia went up 100%. Wow, that's great. Philippines has an installed coal capacity of 10.4 gigawatts, so that's all confirmed. And this is about 25 million tons. They imported Indonesian coal 25 million tons in 2019 as well. And possibly around that number for last year as well, which is actually very impressive, given that India is down 20% and China is down about 15%. But because of Australia argument now, it's up again. So that's also another thing going on that's interesting as well. So what Philippines have done is that they're committed to increase their capacity by 3.5 gigawatts. So that's committed, and that's going to get you maybe 9 million tons of coal demand. So that's the good news for the coal companies. The bad news, they are pivoting away from coal. They have announced a moratorium which could threaten 8 gigawatts of indicative coal projects, which is about 19.4 million tons. But as Sam will explain later on, this is open to debate. So it's not confirmed. There's a lot of explanations, a lot of things going on, because Philippines is a very interesting place and it's all good. So, okay, let's talk about what Philippines did last year. So this is the information from Banchero Costa. You can see everybody's down except the Philippines, and the Philippines is up a lot. And this is also fairly consistent what everybody else is getting. So these are the actual numbers for last year, and this is only a sample. But according to Argus Media, which uses the customs data, for January to October, we're down 14. This sample here, we're down 16. Well, the good news is India started picking up again in the third quarter. It came out of lockdown. They're going to keep going, fair enough. And that was on the call as well on Wednesday with India. And then for China, because of the whole Australia and imbroglio, they are buying Indonesian coal. So Indonesia is a beneficiary of what's going on between Australia and China right now. So Chinese numbers have obviously picked up starting in December as well. Okay, exports to the Philippines. Yeah, in Philippines, big outperformer. So they more or less did 25 million tons, which is amazing, considering that India was down 20 odd and China was down 15%. So Philippines, very important now for Indonesia. And that's why we're going to spend a bit of time talking about the new capacity, and we're going to list out the projects, etc. Okay. So who are the Indonesian companies that benefited? Well, congratulations, Bayan, well done. In the Philippines is a big market for Indonesia because the listed companies disclosed that they sold 15 million tons in 2019, which is 60% of total Indonesian exports. So the big companies are big players into the Philippines, and really, because of what the Philippines did last year, really helped those companies in terms of the financial performance. So it was a win-win for both sides. So we looked at how Philippines compared with the other two markets, and you can see that for the first half of 20, and this is all public information, China wasn't that big, but India really fell off a cliff, and the Philippines was very stable. So in terms of a business management perspective, Philippines has been a big contributor to Indonesia in the first half of 2020. Okay. Now, the bad news or interesting news, renewable capacity is going to go up. At least the Filipinos have said they want to, the Philippines government has said they want to do that. Okay. So we're going to try to unpack and what it means for Indonesia. So this is the installed capacity by type. Oops, it's out of joint, but anyway, what's interesting is that obviously in 2019, coal did go up and renewables went up a little bit, but that's right now. So right now we've got 25 million tons addressable market for the Philippines, okay? And renewables was 7.4 gigawatts, which is about 70% of coal capacity. Now, this is what's going to happen to renewables going forward. So for committed, Philippines has committed to 800 megawatts or 0.8 gigawatts. And this is the big challenge for everyone, both the renewables and coal. The indicative capacity increase is 24.7 gigawatts. That's a lot, okay? And, you know, hydro's got a lot, but solar, big one, more than half is actually solar. You know, we can try to unpack this as we go along. If this 24 goes ahead, it's going to double the coal capacity. In fact, it's going to be, even if the other coal capacity that could be off continues, it'll be 20 gigawatts and in total, and the renewables could be 32 gigawatts. So if the Philippines execute on their renewable plan, their renewable will be bigger than coal. Obviously, this is all up in the air right now. We can talk about that afterwards. Moving on from there. So this is the committed capacity. So this is going ahead. Those are the completion dates, 2024, 2021. It's all good. And this is going to give about 9 million tons of coal for Indonesia. Now, the risk to Indonesia in the short term, especially in the first half, is that as two, my colleague has stated, inventories is 15 million tons there. So the Vietnamese are not in a rush to buy Indonesian coal. And also Australian coal that couldn't go to China may find their way into the Philippines, right? So these are the short-term risks for Indonesian sales into the Philippines. But at least we've got another 9 million tons. So of the 25 million tons right now, we've got another 9 million tons coming in the next 3 years. So the pie is there. But in the short term, you've got Vietnam taking the time, and then you've got Australia putting the coal there. So a lot of changes going on, you know. Okay. This is the indicative coal capacity. So I've quoted the report, but I'm going to unpack the report a bit. So there's 7.8 gigawatts there. Now, what Sam has been hearing out of the Philippines is that the coal power companies will go to the government in the Philippines and discuss this. And how are they going to discuss this? They're going to say, hang on a minute, you know, this is an extension of an existing plant. We've got economies of scale, we've borrowed money, etc., etc. So the Philippines government has indicated they want to pivot to renewables, and they put a moratorium out. But according to Sam, this moratorium is being subject to intense discussion by both sides. Okay? So, you know, all of us market watchers, it's our job to monitor the changes there and to see how much of that potential 19 million tons is back on the table, right? Because 19 million tons is a lot of tons. Because if Philippines is buying 25, 19 is, you know, 80% of that. So something for all of us to watch. Obviously, we have to watch the news. And Pahendra, you know, you may have to go on a mission to the Manila as well, but it's all up in the air right now. I mean, it's anybody's guess, right? But they've really come out and they've said that they want to pivot to renewables, but obviously this is all open to discussion at this point in time. So, yeah, the renewables capacity, like I alluded to earlier. So I put the 7.75 in red because that could be wiped off the map. And even with the 21, even with that 8, it only come out about 22 gigawatts. And the Philippines execute on all their renewables is going to come in at 33, which is a lot more than 22, right? So, you know, but we'll see as this plays out over the next, you know, 2 years. We'll see how that plays out. And this is the Philippines target versus the existing renewables capacity. You can see the target is very aggressive, and this will be consistent with the moratorium that they've announced. So this is the message is unified. And moving on, so what is the challenge for Indonesia? Well, with 10.4 gigawatts, there's 25 million tons of annual coal import demand, so that's there. The committed capacity that's going ahead is going to give you 9 million tons. But the moratorium is the big issue here, because the moratorium could wipe out 8 gigawatts, and this represents about 19.5 million tons. Okay. And if the Philippines, I repeat, were to execute on all their renewable plans, renewable capacity would be 50% more than coal capacity, even if you include the 8 gigawatts that could be wiped out. So there's a lot of moving parts in the Philippines. Watch the space, because a lot of changes going on there. And it's going to be an interesting time for both Indonesia and the Philippines. And with that, thank you, Mahendra. Thank you.